Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a fantastic show for you this evening. Ron Strauss is here with us, Elvis Presley's pilot. He has such a fantastic story to tell and has lived a life that most pilots can only dream of. Before we get started, as always, just a few notes. Tonight's broadcast will be recorded, available on our YouTube channel. Just search for SocialFlight on YouTube and be sure to subscribe there. Also, check out SocialFlight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. We have tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations and our Fly to Win challenge. And with the cooler temperatures coming, it is becoming maintenance season, and so we've teamed up with Tempest Aero for the prize that's happening right now. That is going to be a Tempest prize pack. All you need to do, get the free app, go fly anywhere, land at an airport, collect some points, and you're entered to win in the contest. So with that, let's get started. Ron Strauss is truly a pilot's pilot with an amazing history. He has nearly 30,000 hours, has flown in Vietnam, has a history of including events such as hijacking, and was most famous, of course, for being the pilot of Elvis Presley. And so I'd like to bring him on the line now. And such a pleasure to have such a great storyteller and someone with this great background to come on the line here. And welcome, Ron Strauss. Welcome to SocialFlight Live.
Good evening, Jeff, and good evening, everyone.
We need to start. There's so much to talk about. We need to start at the beginning. So tell me your story of how you first got exposed to aviation and what got you through, kind of exposed into aircraft and then eventually into the cockpit.
Well, it all started back where I was born and raised in Northwest Iowa. I flew in a Stinson 108, probably when I was 8 or 10 years old or thereabouts, and I really fell in love with it. And after I landed, I said, you know, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life, and that's exactly what I did.
That's awesome. Now, I understand you went from there into the military?
Well, when I was 17, I went into the Air Force, and I started off as a aircraft and engine mechanic on a B-47. And then I worked myself up to crew chief, and then I was on that for quite a while. And then they asked for volunteers for flight engineers, and I did. I volunteered and got accepted, and I went to C-141A school and became a flight engineer.
C-141 is pretty big plane. You mainly run missions between the United States and Vietnam at the time?
Yep. I flew it 3,400 hours, 3.5 years.
Wow. And at what point did you kind of get the bug that you needed to be in the cockpit?
Well, I was in the cockpit as a flight engineer,
right.
But I decided to get out of the Air Force and become a pilot, which I did.
That's awesome. What kind of planes did you fly when you were getting your license and moving yourself into the left seat?
Cessna 152s or 150s. That's all they had, basically.
Now, at that time, so you've gotten out of the military. Obviously, all that experience with that. Did you use the GI Bill in order to get your training?
Yes, I did. I got all my pilot's license under the GI Bill, and at the time, if you had a private, they would pay 90%, and you paid 10%. And
wow.
I got all my ratings and continued down from there.
Wow. What was it like going from there into the commercial side of flying? How did you move from the training in 152s and those types of things and into your commercial flight?
Well, I was hired as a flight engineer when I got out of the Air Force. After I got all my pilot's ratings, then I got hired by Modern Air Transport out of Berlin, Germany, flying the Convair 990. And I flew that also as an engineer and as a pilot.
Mm.
and I had a blast. I really enjoyed Berlin, and I enjoyed the 990, although it was really a bear to fly. And, the corridors, you had to fly them at either 8,500 or 9,500. And out of Berlin, that was during the Cold War. And of course, the MiGs would come up and they would light their afterburners and try scaring all the people in the passengers. And they did initially, and then you got used to it.
Wow. So, I mean, what was it like flying the 990? And I mean, did it take a lot to get used to doing that, especially out of and going through? You said there's a corridor to get through East, I guess basically the East Berlin airspace to get through.
East Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was a blast flying. See the 707 and the DC-8 and the Convair 880 and had 35 degrees wing sweep, and the 990 had 39 degrees. And it was a bear to fly, but it was fun. I mean, I really had a blast flying it.
What aspects made it kind of like a bear? Was it the handling, or was it just in the systems?
Well, you could be sitting just on a ILS and have everything perfectly lined up, and then it would start Dutch rolling on you, and you had to take proper procedures. Otherwise, it would just progressively get worse and worse. And who knows?
Oh, geez. Sounds anything but punching numbers just to get it to come in. That sounds like some real flying. I assume you had to deal with weather and other things like that as well at the time.
Well, it would cruise, the 990 would cruise, it was the fastest commercial airliner in the world, except the one France had there, or whatever that was called. I can't remember now, but it was a bear. I mean, we would cruise it at 8.7, and of course nowadays everybody's cruising at 8.7. But back then, and on descent, across the border, we'd have to, by then you only use DME, and of course the DME would calculate ground speed, and then that would change as you change in altitude. And we would get it going so fast, we get it up to 9.2. And in fact, it would suck the nose gear open, and you just took your hand up and kept on going, because across that border, no matter what.
Wow.
So
And who else did you fly for during that time period? Because you flew for a number of different airlines, right?
well, I got furloughed, and then I flew as flight engineer for Lenica Airlines, which was owned by General Somoza, which was the dictator of Nicaragua. And I flew that for about a year. And then I got recalled with Modern Air, went back flying that as a first officer. And I flew that until we went bankruptcy. And then I went back part-time with flying as an engineer and as a co-pilot with Lenica out of Miami.
Now, was Lenica when this fascinating incident happened with you with General Somoza and Nicaragua and basically the hijacking?
Yep.
Well, tell me about that.
Well, it was pretty interesting, actually, because it was December of 1974, and I got this call from the chief pilot, Mike Marciano, and he says, "Hey, we've got a little problem down in Managua. Would you like to go down and fly it?" And I said, "Not especially, And he says, "Well, they're not going to allow any locals, Nicaraguans, to fly on the airplane, and we need Americans or foreigners." And I said, "Well, then I'll go down there and do the caper." Well, what happened is they had a Christmas party down there in Managua, and they raided they had a lot of problems down in Nicaragua at the time, and they had a lot of political prisoners. And so they went in there and they had a Christmas party, and these well, I guess they were called hijackers or whatever. And they went in, they killed one guard, and then they held the people that and ambassadors and everybody like that as prisoners. And then they wanted $5 million. And of course, the good old U.S. sent them $5 million, as if General Somoza didn't have it, of course. But anyway, then they wanted to release 20 political prisoners. And so we went down there and flew them out of there. But it was
So
pretty.
You went down knowingly into this situation
Yeah.
to fly them out of there. Wow, that takes some guts.
Well, or brains, I'm not sure which. But anyway, we went down there, and they had another pilot and myself, and he was American, and of course I was. And then we had a engineer that I think was from Venezuela. I'm not sure from that. And so they brought these 20 political prisoners out, and they had a burp gun at my head and a 45 at the other pilot's head. And then they got a Monsignor and a priest to escort on this crew bus to the airplane. And they held the guns at their head. And if somebody, got too hostile or something, they would have let go. So I caught the other pilot's eye. I saw this guy, he had a tripod machine gun setting off in the grass on the runway. And then I started thinking, well, maybe that's why they don't want foreigners, or I mean locals on the airplane, because maybe they'll shoot us down as we try to take off. And I thought, wow, that might be interesting. So as they're loading these political prisoners, I got this attention of the other pilot. And I said, about this guy in the weeds there with the machine gun. We looked at it and we thought, well, probably just be quiet. Hopefully things will go pretty good. And they did. They made us all speak English, which was super weird. And then we went to take off, and we did. And we had the guns, the $5 million, and the political prisoners, plus the hijackers, or whatever you want to call them. And so we went to Cuba. And my primary job was to just tell the people where we were going, because we didn't know where initially we were going to go. They were talking to Algiers, and place like that. Well, we didn't have the maps. We didn't have the range to do it. So anyway, we went to Cuba, and the only real checkpoint between Managua and Cuba is Swan Island. And I was pointing it to them, the people, Swan Island, physically looking at it and then pointing on the map. And then when we got to Cuba, the prisoners didn't want to believe they were at Cuba already. And so they said, well, just, is there any way we can identify? And I said, yeah, we can buzz the tower. It's got a big sign there, and it says, San Jose Tower, or whatever it was. I can't remember now for sure. And so we buzzed the airport, and I'm pointing down at the sign, and I'm telling you, we just about put the wingtip in the tower. And they were convinced then we were there. So we landed, and of course, all the Jeeps came up, and they took off the guns first, then the money, and then the political prisoners. And so we were ready to get out of there immediately. And they wouldn't let us go. So they said, no, you got to go in the terminal. I said, no, we want to leave right now. And they said, no, you're not going to leave. You're going to go into the tower. So we did. And they had to feed us. And of course, it was all the silverware and the linen and all the stuff like that. trying to impress us, I guess. So then after about 2 hours, they said, okay, you can head out to the airplane. So we did. And back then, and that may still be now, you had to get startup clearance. Well, we just went started the engines anyway. We didn't get any clearance or anything. And we said, we're ready to taxi. And they said, no, don't taxi. So we said, well, we're ready to taxi. They said, no, don't taxi. So then, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 minutes passed. And then they said, well, don't taxi. I said, well, we're ready to taxi. And they says, if you taxi, we'll send the MiGs after you. So we thought, well, there's only 3 of us out here. And that we thought that Key West, the Navy, was listening to all this. And we thought, well, we just take off anyway. And we'll just pick the gear up and keep it, right on the ocean and just run to Key West. And the ADAS there was, I think, I don't know, it was only 90 miles between Cuba and Key West. So the Navy Air Station there is right there. And we figured that we could outrun them, and then we debated about that. And we said, well, maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't. And but then the other pilot says, well, what if all these Jeeps come back with the prisoners? And we said, well, if they do, and he said they'll block the runway. I said, hell, we'll just take off in the taxiway and make a run for Key West. So anyway, then I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later, they said, oh, go ahead and taxi. And so we taxied, and then we're at the end of the runway. We said, well, we're ready for takeoff. And they said, you're cleared to take off. They didn't say it twice. So boy, off we went. And we ran it, across Cuba and back to Managua. And that's where I met General Somoza. And he thanked us for all this stuff. And that was it. That's it.
Oh my goodness. So you literally went from volunteering for something to sitting there with a gun to your head while all of this happens, making a decision what to do, buzzing the tower in an airliner, and then deciding if you're going to try to outrun some MiGs. That's a day's work.
Yeah, that is. The blast. But anyway, then I got permanently hired with Lanica after that. That was pretty good.
So tell me how you wound up. What was it getting to the point that you got interviewed to be Elvis's pilot?
Well, that's interesting because I was flying. I had a lot of Convair 880 and 880M and 990 time. And I was working junkets, and I was out of Miami, and I was a holiday. I can't remember which one. And the broker, Nigel Winfield, came by, and he says, hey, what are you doing out here on a holiday? I said, I'm working because the airplane's got to leave tomorrow, and we got some mechanical problems with it, and we got to get it ready to go. And he says, oh, that's pretty good. And then we departed the next day for Vegas and ran a bunch of junkets. In the meantime, I lived in a Miami area, and the broker, he says, I'd done him a lot of favors, a few favors maybe I'm not too proud of, but anyway, what the hell, he's got to do what he's got to do. And then anyway, he says, I'm going to sell Elvis Presley an airplane. And I thought, well, yeah, you and everybody else is going to sell Elvis an airplane. And he says, get a crew ready. So I called these friends that I flew with at Modern Air at 990. And I said, would you be interested in working for Elvis if this guy is, telling the truth? And they said, oh, yeah. So I get a call, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 months later. And he says, hey, we're going to Memphis tomorrow for an interview. And I says, he says, what's the name of the crew? And I said, well, it's been months. I don't know if they're still available or wanting to fly, So I called them up, and they said, oh, yeah, no problem. So we went up there the next day. Now, we thought we were going to meet Elvis. No, we interviewed with Vernon Presley, his father. And it was the shortest interview I ever had in my life. And I talked to the broker and I says, what's this interview going to be like? And he says, I don't know, but he says, just make sure you know how much money you're going to ask him to have. Okay. So we did. And the other pilot went in first, and he only lasted, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. Boy, I thought, geez, that's really crazy. So then it was my turn. I went in, and I lasted 2 or 3 minutes. And Vernon Presley asked me 2 things. He says, if we hire you, you just fly the airplane. We do the entertainment. I said, yeah. He said, how much money you want? And I told him, and he said, okay. And then the flight engineer went in and it lasted the same thing, 2 or 3 minutes. So we all came out, we were dumbfounded, and we were done. And but Vernon talked to Elvis every night. So Elvis didn't want to waste his time with us at that time. So he just bypassed us completely. So then I get a call maybe 2 or 3 months later, and Nigel Winfield, he says, come on down to 36th Street. I want to talk to you, show you something. I said, I ain't got time. I'm busy. He says, I really got something I want to show you. And I says, I told you I'm busy. And he says, hey, come on down. It's something to do with Elvis. I said, whoops, I'll be right down. So he came down there, and we sat at this conference table. He threw me this contract that I still have, and it was the first party, the second party, and all that stuff. And I said, yeah, I just want to see how much money I'm going to make. And I looked right at it. It was exactly what I asked. So I probably asked the too little, probably. But anyway, that was how I got hired with Elvis.
That's awesome. What was the first time that you met him?
Well, that was completely different, because then the airplane was down to Fort Worth, Texas, Mitcham Field, and it was being done. Now, Elvis flew down there 3 or 4 times on Jetstar to look at the progress being made. And then when it was all made, then we went to, we went to Memphis first. And I'll tell you a quick story. It was pretty interesting, because we went, it got a little bit, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And we finally got up there and we're talking to Vernon Presley. And we said, we're going to go from Fort Worth to Long Beach, and then we're going to go to Nashville and get the airplane certified. And I said, we'll probably need a little bit of money, for hotels and food and stuff. And he says, well, how much you want? We said, well, $2,500 would be fine. And so Vernon calls this bank, and the bank, he didn't even mention his name. I guess the guy recognized his voice. He says, hey, you got $2,500 cash? And the banker says, no, the safes are all locked. They won't open till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Okay, hung up. He calls Sears and Roebuck. No name, nothing. Calls Sears and Roebuck, talks to this gal, and says, hey, you got $2,500? Yeah. And he says, I'm sending 3 pilots down. Give it to him. So we go back to customer service. This is crazy. And we're all ex-airline pilots. So we got to count for every penny. And so we go back there, and she's got this wad of money. And so I give it to, 2 or 3 different, the other pilot and the engineer, and we're all counting. She says, what the heck are you doing? I said, we're counting it, And she says, it's all there. And it was. And so we took
You went to Sears to get $2,500 for it to be paid for Elvis.
Sears and Roebuck. And and so said, well, where do we sign for it? She says, sign for it and get the hell out of here. And so we took off to Long Beach and had some maintenance done there. And then we went to Nashville. And then we're coming we got it certified. And then we were bringing it to Memphis. And we thought, well, Elvis will meet us right there. And we got in there about noon or thereabouts. And we waited, no Elvis, nobody. Man, that's strange. So the next day, the engineer and I and the pilot went out, and same thing, waited all day, no Elvis. So the third day, we just didn't even go out there. We get this call from Joe Esposito. It says, get out the airplane. Elvis wants to meet the crew and see you, and see the airplane. It's all right. So we get out there and we're all in the cockpit with the door shut, and we're looking out the side window. Here comes Elvis and his mafia. So he come on board, and they went through all the airplane, and then he wanted to meet the crew. We'd never met Elvis. The other pilot went out first, and then it was my turn. And Elvis was sitting on the back of one of the chairs there, and he had this big old smile with this dimple. Whoops, it just turned red there. And I looked at him, and he says, well, Ron, I guess you know who I am. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Presley. He says, none of this, sir, none of this, Mr. Presley. It's Ron. May I call you Ron? Elvis. And that's the way it was until he passed on. Fantastic guy to work with, just unbelievable nice. And he gave away stuff that was unbelievable. I've still got this Corvette. I've had it for, I think, 45 or 46 years. It's a 73 Corvette, and I bought it with the tips he gave me. And I paid $5,250 for it back in 76, I think it was. But anyway, I'll tell you the story to going to Honolulu. I get this call from Joe Esposito, and he says, hey, Joe, or he says, hey, Ron, we're going to go to Honolulu, I don't know, in a week or something like that. And I said, geez, I'd really like to take my wife. Now, the original airplane would carry, I think, 120 some people. When Elvis got done with it, it would only carry 29 people. And he says, we got 4 open seats open between Memphis and Oakland, but Oakland, we have people standing by to get on this flight. And I thought, geez, are you sure about that? And he says, oh, yeah, I'm positive. Okay, so we take off out of Memphis, leave the wife at home, and going to Oakland because we wanted to pick up fuel there. And there was 4 open seats. And then we got done refueling. We're ready to leave. 4 open seats. Ooh, boy, I'm madder than hell, but I ain't gonna let it on. That's just part of life. That's the way it goes. So we get about halfway to Honolulu, and Elvis comes in the cockpit, and he says, hey, how's it going? I said, the weather's good. We'll be there in a couple hours or so. And he says, Ron, I understand. I won't use the words that he used or the word, but you can probably guess about what it was. He said, I understand you're a little bit ticked off. I says, no, Elvis, I'm fine, no problem. No, he says, I'm madder than hell. Your wife should be on this flight. I said, no, that's just the way it goes. Maybe next time. No. He says, when we land, first class airline ticket, I'm paying for everything from Memphis to Honolulu and back.
Wow.
No, I ain't going to do that. And he says, well, let me ask you, do you like working for me? I says, yes, sir. He said, I told you none of that yes, sir stuff. It's Elvis and Ron. Okay. He says, do I pay you enough? Yep. He says, if she ain't out of here tomorrow, I will replace you. And I didn't want to take the chance, So I called up my wife, and then she worked at the time for FedEx. It was pretty flexible with her. And I says, back up. You're going first class out to Honolulu. Oh, I can't do that. I says, hey, Elvis is paying for everything. Don't worry about it. And he did. First class airline ticket. Just walked up, bought it, whatever it was. I wish I'd kept the ticket because I can't remember now how much it was. But anyway, we took off. She came over there, and then she had to get back with the kids and her job. So she could only stay about, 4 or 5 days. We didn't know when we were coming back. And she first class airline ticket all the way back. And then we came back, 3 or 4 days later. And I had a stack of bills that I wanted to give to Mr. Presley, and he would authorize them and then pay them, you know. And so we went through all that, and then I had this airline ticket, very expensive, whatever it was. And I really gave it to him, you know. He says, Nancy, just pay it. I said, but Mr. Presley, it's pretty steep. Don't you want to look at it? He says, I talked to Elvis last night about it. Don't worry about it. Just pay him. And he did. Just wrote me out a check.
Wow.
I should have checked, you know. But I mean, that's the way they operated. I mean, fantastic. I mean, and I'll tell you another story. And we're doing pretty good. We got 30 minutes in.
Oh, we're good. We're good. You go.
So he was dating Linda Thompson at the time. And Linda was Miss Universe, or I'm not sorry, Miss Tennessee, or runner-up Miss Tennessee, whatever it was, back in 71 or 2 or 3 or whatever. And she was really a knockout, of course. And I hadn't seen her for about, oh, I don't know, a month maybe. And here she came in the cockpit. She always, her and Elvis always came in the cockpit and said, hey, how's it going? Do you need anything? And then when we take them to their destination, she would come up, they would both come in the cockpit. How's it going? You need anything? Great flight, you know, everything. And then she'd kiss the engineer, us 2 pilots, on the cheek. So here she walks in, I think it was West Coast someplace. And just a knockout, I'm telling you. So anyway, I'm doing some paperwork at the time. She walked in with Elvis and said, hey, how's it going? I looked at her and my mouth just dropped open. I just couldn't believe it. Here it was, a good looking gal, of course, a nice body on her, an American native Indian outfit on, blonde hair, tan skin, and a feather in the hair. And my mouth just opened. And Elvis looked right at me, and I won't use the words he used. He said, Ron, don't even think about it. So we took off and went someplace. And when we ended, she came in, her and Elvis, and kissed the engineer on the cheek, then went to kiss me on the cheek. She whispered in my ear, don't give up, Ron, you still got a chance. Yeah, I'm going to shoot Elvis out of the saddle, right? There ain't no way. But anyway, it was just a fantastic, I mean, and you know, I originally rented a townhouse in Memphis because we were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And after about 6 months, I talked to Elvis and I says, Elvis, how do you like to crew the airplane? Do you want anything different? He says, no, just keep doing the same thing you're doing. So a couple of days later, I talked to Vernon Presley, and I asked him the same thing. He told me the same thing. And I says, well, I'd like to buy a house. Mr. Presley says, okay. So I wanted him to really call the bank and grease the skids a little bit. So he says, hey, look, I said, Mr. Presley, would you call the bank or someplace that I can get a loan to buy this house? And he says, no, just go down there and tell them who you are. And I thought, oh, that's strange. So I went down to this bank, and the president of the bank, I walked in and I met this guy, and he says, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like to talk to the president of the bank. And he says, what about? I says, I want to borrow some money. And he says, no, just go over and see John over here, whatever his name was. He does loans. And I said, no, I want to talk to the president. He said, I told you that John over here does the loans, home loans. And I says, would you tell the president of the bank that Elvis Presley's pilot is in the building? And he says, yeah. So he goes into the president. And the president, Ron, get in here. Come on over here, you know. So we sat there, we shoot the breeze for about 5-10 minutes. and he throws me this piece of paper. It's a contract with all kinds of blanks on it. And I threw it back at him. I says, I'm not going to sign that. It's like signing a blank check. And he says, look, Ron, he says, Elvis has got $1 million floating checking account and a whole bunch more. You think I'm going to risk that account for a lousy, I think it was $73,000 or $75,000 I was wanting. And I said, nope. And I signed it and threw it back to him. And he says, oh, by the way, he says, how much collateral you got? Nothing. And he says, how much money do you want? I says, I don't know. I think it was around $73,000, $75,000. And he says, how much interest you want to pay? And I said, just as little as possible. Okay. And he says, when do you want? Oh, you want the money like in a couple of days. I said, that would be great, you know. So I go home and he calls me in a couple of days. The president of the bank calls me. He says, Ron, I got your check. Come on down and pick it up. I went down. There was no collateral. The interest back then, I don't know, 7.5% or 8%. I paid like 3.5% interest, about half what it was, and took the check and I walked out. I said, geez, isn't this great? And that's the way they worked. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
It must be nice floating in that circle, that's for sure.
Well, it was. It was fantastic. I mean, Jesus, just the different things that, you know, I bought this Corvette and I think it was 76. And it was just right down from the mansion. And I thought, wow, this is a nice car. I drove by it and I said, well, hell, I might just go check it out. And I did. I checked it out. I said, what do you want for that? I don't know, you wanted 5,500 or something like that. I said, that's too much money. Left. It came back 2 other times. The third time was a Friday afternoon. He says, I will take this damn car, and he says, drive as much as you want. He says, if you wreck it, you buy it, $5,250, and I'll see you Monday. And I drove it 400 miles, got it up to about 120 or 30, and it ran. Oh, he probably nothing at all. So I bought it. I drove it back in Monday, and he says, well, give me a check. And I said, well, I don't have that kind of money in the checking account. I'll have to transfer some money over, and it probably won't be good until about Wednesday. And he says, take the cars, here's the keys, and give me the check, and I'll deposit it Wednesday. And that's what he did exactly. So unbelievable the way they
Wow.
were.
That's awesome.
The tips he gave us was, I bought the car with the tips he gave me. And I'll tell you another story. We were leaving, I think it was Long Beach, and you're going out, leaving Long Beach, and you if you have a west departure, which we did, you go out over the ocean, and you make Seal Beach return departure, and then head out to wherever you're going to the east. And you have to really pay attention, because once you leave the coastline, you're IFR basically, even though it may be VFR conditions. So I was my leg and I was flying and I was really paying attention. And Elvis walked in right after takeoff and throws this check down. I glanced at it and it was $300, I thought. And I thought, well, that's okay. You know, I really appreciate that. But the other pilot and the engineer was really getting excited. And I thought, well, geez, why are they getting all excited over $300, $100 a piece? That's nothing. And finally, the other pilot says, Ron, give me the damn airplane. Look at that check. I looked up, and it was $3,000, $1,000. And that's what he did. I mean, lots of times he'd just walk in, and it depends. Mostly it was after a concert. If the concert went well, he would pay us money. I mean, give us tips. It was just, you know, 300, 500. Twice he paid us $1,000 a piece. I mean, it was just crazy.
Wow. That's absolutely amazing. Now,
Yeah.
tell me the first time that you saw him in concert.
Well, I can't remember where it was, but I saw probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 of his concerts. And if we weren't leaving right, if we were leaving right afterwards, there's no way we could go to the concert because we'd have to service the airplane and get it ready pre-flight. So, but if we're going to be there 3 or 4 days, then we'd ask Joe Esposito, could we get tickets? And yeah, every time he asked, we would give it, or we would ask, he would give us tickets. And I'll tell you another time. The first trip we made with Elvis on board was from Memphis to Las Vegas. And we were there, well, he had 2 shows a night, I think for 7 days a week, maybe 6 days a week. Then he'd take one night off, do 6 more or 2 more a night. So we called Joe Esposito and said, hey, Joe, we've never seen Elvis perform. We'd like to really see that if you can get some seats. And he says, I'll call you right back in 5-10 minutes. 10 minutes, he calls back. He says, look, just come down there for show, whatever it was. And I said, well, how the hell do we do this? Do we give the tip Major G? What do we do? You just tell them who in the hell you are. We'll have the seats ready for you. Well, that's strange. So a couple of days later, or whatever it was, we go down there and we talked to Major D and we said, hey, we're Elvis pilots. Oh, he says, we know you're coming. We got seats reserved for you. And they were the best seats in the house. I mean, right in front in the middle. And all 3 of us, we were sitting down there, just really going on. So Elvis comes out and sings 2 or 3 or 4 songs. And then in one of the songs, he stops and says, time out, time out. He says, I bought this new airplane to take on tour. And I got the crew with us tonight. And I'd like for you to meet them. And by name, and spotlights were on us. By name, he made each one of us stand up. And of course, everybody clapped and everything. We couldn't buy anything in the hotel again. I mean, it was unbelievable nice. But what person would do something like that, I mean, he was just fantastic to us. Now,
Wow.
was with him 24 hours a day, but it was just unbelievable.
Wow. Now, I understand you guys also were famous for making stops for special Fool's Gold sandwiches. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's very true. I think it was Lisa Marie, that was his daughter, 7th or 8th or 9th birthday, whatever it was. And so we get a call from Joe Esposito, and he says, hey, we're going to go to Denver, get some peanut butter or Fool's Gold or whatever it was, sandwiches. They were about that long and $28 a piece back in the 76s and the 70s. And so we took there, and it was Lisa Marie's birthday, and they had a birthday cake, and we sang happy birthday. I bet you can't guess who the lead singer was on that. So we were constantly checking the weather, and I could only take a couple bites of that sandwich. It was just too rich for me. So we were checking
bacon and peanut butter or something like that.
Well, it's bacon, peanut butter, jelly, and I don't know what all, but it was a monster sandwich. It was big. It was like a foot long. And, so we were checking the weather, and the whole Los Angeles basin was IFR 00 in fact. And this was like 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, something like that. So we invited Elvis in the cockpit. Said, Elvis, the weather is 00. Nobody's getting in, and they're all diverting. And if we divert with you on this airplane, it's a real pain in the butt. And he says, I guess you guys don't want to go. I said, we'll go, but we're making you work. We ain't going to get in. Nobody's getting in. And he says, just stand by a minute. So he sent, I think it was Dick Grobe, the chief of security at the time, took Lisa Marie to a hotel, and then when the weather got better, they were going to take her into airline into. So he goes back, talks to his friends, and his friend says, He came back in the cockpit and he says, take me to Louisiana. It was either Baton Rouge or Shreveport, one or the other. And said, okay, we checked the weather and it was good. We had plenty of fuel, so off we went. Well, Elvis at times he would stay in a jump seat and watch the takeoff or watch the landing. Most of the time it was a landing. And it was just at daybreak. And Elvis was in his jumpsuit in the jump seat. And we made the landing, and I had no idea. We'd never been there before. And said, hey, Tower, where do we get some fuel? He said, well, try that Texaco or whatever it was over there. So here we taxied over there. Pretty soon this manager, he was probably about 30 years old. And by this time, Elvis had got out of the jump seat. He was standing back in the corner. And this guy walked right in front of him, didn't even recognize it, didn't even know he was there. And he says, how much, what do you guys want? I said, well, we'd like to have a little bit of fuel. Well, he says, how much fuel do you want? I said, about 5,000 gallons. And he says, well, who in the hell's going to pay for that? I said, that guy right back there. And Elvis. And he says, oh my God. He says, Elvis, he says, he shook his hand and he says, my wife's in love with you. And of course, Elvis just shook it off. And he says, can I introduce you to my wife if she gets out here? And he says, oh yeah, no problem at all. So we told the managers to say, look, we can only drag our feet so much, and you better tell her to get her tail out here right now. Now, you imagine this, and she was a very attractive lady. You get up at 6 in the morning, awakened by your husband, and says, you can come out of the airplane and meet Elvis. Do you put your makeup on, or do you not, or what? Well, I guess she decided to put her makeup on because security finally came up to us and said, hey, look, do we have a maintenance problem or what? And we said, no, it takes some time. He says, well, Elvis is really getting impatient. He'd like to get to Memphis. And I said, all right. So we started taxiing out. And here's this woman say, stop, stop, stop. What the hell? Ain't no way we're going to stop, So she missed her chance.
Oh.
But that's the way it goes.
That's when you just hop in the car and go.
Yeah. Well, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I can understand that. But he was just fantastic to us. I mean,
did he come in the cockpit at all, like while you were flying, other than that one time
Yes, he did.
Did he spend time with you?
He lots of times he would come in on takeoff and landing, mainly landings. But lots of times he would just come on. If it was a day flight, he would come in the cockpit. In fact, we were coming someplace, I don't know where we're at. I think New York or someplace like that. And Elvis came in the cockpit, and he says, hey, how's it going, or whatever, And so finally the ATC says, hey, is Elvis on that airplane? And I says, here, you want to talk to him? And Elvis grabs the mic. He says, hey, how's it going, gang, or whatever. And we got a big laugh out of that. It was fantastic. I mean, just to us, it was unbelievable. Just, we were coming back. I was also in charge of maintenance. Not that I had to do the maintenance, but I had to make sure it was done at the right, and it was done correctly. So we came from South Dakota, I think it was, to Memphis. And we invited Elvis in the cockpit and said, hey, Elvis, it's going to be rough on this flight. We got a bunch of thunderstorms. We're going to circumnavigate them. We're not going to go in them and see what happens. And he says, are you guys comfortable with it? And I said, yeah, we're fine with it. So we took off and we told him, we said, strap in because it's going to be rough. And it was. And so we landed in Memphis, and Elvis came in cockpit and he says, it was pretty damn rough. He says, this radar show up, everything? And I said, Elvis, this is an old antiquated radar. It's an old C, I think it was. And he says, well, you talk to Daddy tomorrow and tell him you want a new radar. So I went in, I talked to Mr. Presley a couple days later, and I said, you know, that radar, he says, I guess you guys had a rough flight the other night. I said, yeah, it was rough. And he says, well, on that radar, do you want to replace it? I said, yeah. He says, well, find out how much it's going to cost. I said, I know exactly what it costs. It'd be $17,000 for a new radar. And he says, put it in. So we scheduled everything, you know, the harness, everything was made. So the airplane was going to be grounded a couple of 3 days, I think. And of course, when it was grounded, we could have a few beers. Otherwise, we couldn't touch nothing. You're on call 24 days, 7 days a week, so you didn't dare do anything. So, but I was charged, and it was pretty interesting because this goes on for about a year, and about every 2 or 3 months, I'd ground the airplane to have a spec or B or C or D or whatever it was inspection, you know. And Mr. Presley said, you know, you're sure inspecting that airplane awful. I think he got wise to what we were doing. And I thought, Mr. Presley, there's 3 very important people on that airplane. Don't forget it. And he said, well, who the hell's that? I said, you, Elvis, and me. And he says, put that radar in here, pull that, keep it up, you know. So, but that's the way we could have it. Yeah.
Now your flyby back there in Cuba wasn't your only flyby. Did you actually do a flyby of Mount Rushmore?
Oh yeah, that's a pretty neat story. We were going from, I think, Lincoln or someplace like that to Mount Rushmore, not Mount Rushmore, but Rapid City, South Dakota. And so we're coming near Mount Rushmore, and one of the security guards comes up and he says, hey, gang, can we make some circles around Mount Rushmore? Elvis has never seen it. I said, stand by a minute, let's see. So I got ATC, and we were VFR conditions. So he says, hey, can we circle around Mount Rushmore a few times? And he says, circle as much as you want. And so we just circled around to the left. Then we made a U-turn and made a couple to the right. And then we told ATC, well, we're ready to go into Rapid City. They said, all right, here we go. So it was fantastic.
Did ATC always know by the tail number that this was Elvis's plane?
I think so, most of the time, because we had to put down who owned the airplane on the flight plan.
Oh, and that wasn't hidden. That was boom, Elvis Presley.
No, that was Elvis Presley Enterprise. So most of the times we got just direct. Not all the time.
Yeah, just direct.
Yeah. So, but it was pretty cool. I mean, the money was good. The benefits you got was just unbelievable.
That's amazing. And now the last little tomfoolery thing. Is it true that you got in trouble for sleeping in his bed?
Oh, well, here, I'll tell you the story about that. I think it was Dick Grobe. But anyway, we'd go out there many a times at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd get a call and say, get out the airplane. Elvis wants to go someplace. And of course, Elvis would show sometimes. Sometimes he wouldn't show. So there was us 3, well, 2 pilots, 1 engineer, and 1 flight attendant. And I was doing some paperwork or whatever it was, doing whatever I had to do. And the other pilot, the engineer, and the flight attendant all had their comfort seats, and they were sound asleep. By the time I got done, the only thing left was Elvis's bed. So that's no big deal. So I just go back there and pull off my boots. Now, I didn't get under the sheets. I just pulled a blanket over me. Went to sound asleep. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And before Elvis ever showed, security would show, and they would check everything out with us and make sure everything was okay. And security came in and woke me up, and I think it was Dick Grobe. And Dick says, hey, what the hell are you doing sleeping? I said, well, I was tired, and I was asleep until I rudely got awakened. And he said, well, Elvis is on his way. So I we took off and went someplace. And then Elvis came in the cockpit. halfway or wherever we were. And he says, "Hey, how's it going, gang?" "Pretty good, no problem." And he says, "Ron, I understand you got a little bit of problem." And I says, "Yeah, security caught me sleeping in your bed." He says, "Ron, you can sleep in my bed anytime you want." That, never another question. I mean,
Oh,
just
that's awesome.
fantastic the way he treated us.
Mm,
Like I said, with him 24 hours a day. But
yeah.
the crew, I mean, the gifts he gave us was just unbelievable. I mean, it's
So
just,
tell me
go
about the
ahead.
hard part, August 16th, 1977.
Well, uh, I was at the mansion when he died, and I thought it was Vernon Presley because I saw Nancy take him in, or whatever her name was, into the mansion, and boy, he looked really bad. Anyway, I talked to Elvis earlier, and I asked him. I says, "Hey, he had some wicked go-karts." I says, "You mind if we drive those sometimes?" He says, "You can drive them anytime you want." Good. So that's what I was doing. I was out racing these go-karts, and they, like I said, they were really wicked. So it got late. We were going to Portland, Maine that night. So I said, "Well, I better get home and get some sleep." And when I got home, my daughter was crying. She said, "Elvis died. Elvis died." I said, "No, no, that was his father." Well, it was Elvis. And then we went out to Long Beach and picked up Priscilla, the girlfriend, George Hamilton, some other movie star or something, and brought him back to the funeral. And then we took him and flew him back to Long Beach. And I flew with the airplane back, just the four of us. And that was the end. I didn't want to fly it anymore. But anyway, the funeral, we were at the mansion. We're invited to the mansion, and I drove my yellow Corvette to the mansion. And we went in and had the ceremony, and then we were going to go to get in the limos and go to the cemetery. And these cops came up, Highway Patrol, said, "Who owns that yellow vet?" "Well, hell, I ain't done nothing yet." And said, "Well, I do." And he says, "Would you mind driving that in the funeral procession?" I said, "No, I'd love to." And he says, I said, "But why?" He says, "We want to identify the very last car because there's tens of thousands of people lined up from the mansion to the cemetery." I said, "All right." So we went in and we were the very last car, drove it into the ceremony, buried him, and then coming back, of course, there's a state patrol car right behind me. And I just got in it, and I thought we were going back to the mansion like we were supposed to for coffee and donuts. And this cop, sirens blowing, his lights going, and he's going down Memphis 70, 80, 90 mile an hour, running all these red lights, got motorcycle cops and, stopping them. And I'm right behind him, just having a blast. And my wife, "I don't think we should be here." And I says, what makes you think that?" She says, "When you get time, look in the mirror. There's nobody behind you." Oh, cripes, But we were having a blast, and I says, "The hell with it. We'll let them keep on going." And then they didn't turn to the mansion. So they went to the airport. The guy jumps out of this patrol car, gets in this airplane, and takes off. So I asked the guys at Memphis Aero, says, "Who the hell was that?" So that was the governor of Tennessee. So that's the story behind it. Still got the Corvette. So we're
Oh
about
my,
3 or 4
my, my.
minutes.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining us here on Social Flight Live. It's such an amazing story, and I think it brings everybody a little bit closer to really who Elvis was. And I can tell, to anyone out there, if you have not gone to visit Graceland to get to see the Lisa Marie,
Yeah.
the aircraft that Ron flew with Elvis, and see that, you really should. I've been there. It's incredibly touching. You get a real sense, and even more so, of course, talking to you, Ron, about who he was and what a genuine and really young individual he was, and so
Yeah.
giving.
Well, there's a book written, and it's called Destined to Die Young by Sally Hoedel out of Traverse City. and read that book. It's Destined to Die Young, and it's really, really interesting. Really interesting.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine also what your logbook looks like, because it's a lesson to
Different.
everybody who has something interesting to be taking notes in their logbook.
Well, every flight that I made with Elvis is in there except the very last one from Long Beach to Memphis. And I don't know why that's not in there.
Mm, yeah. Well, again, thank you so much, Ron Strauss, Elvis
Yeah.
Presley's pilot, for joining us here tonight on Social Flight Live. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And to all of you who have taken time out of your evening to join us here as well, I also wish you thanks. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and we wish that you continue to join us here on the show. We're here for you. We created Social Flight Live to support the general aviation community, and we are here every Tuesday. We are back next week, Tuesday, December 7th, with George Brawley of GAMI, and we will be talking about alternative fuels, Tornado Alley turbos, all sorts of things that affect every general aviation pilot coming up. And you will be getting wings credit for this particular program if you register for it through the FAA Wings site. That's Tuesday, December 7th at 8 p.m. here on Social Flight Live. On Tuesday, December 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern, of course, we have the first female Thunderbirds pilot, Nicole Malachowski, and really, it's going to be amazing. She is so accomplished, and what a wonderful story from her. And then on the 21st, we celebrate our tradition where we speak with folks from the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, in which case you'll get an inside scoop on what's been happening over the last 12 months with defense readiness and everything that goes along with that. Until next time, I'm Jeff Simon for Social Flight. Blue skies.